Well, some quick announcements. Tomorrow in the afternoon, there'll be a lunchtime talk between Andrew Zago and Michelle Chang in the library. This Friday, there'll be a roundtable discussion between Office, Gears and Van Severen, Michael Meredith and Hillary Sample, Eric Lapierre, myself and Sharon Johnston at the Sterling Building in the afternoon. Next Tuesday, I'm sorry?
It's called 485.
485, yeah, I forget the number. Next Tuesday, there will be a conversation between Dave Hickey, Jennifer Bonner, and Max Scoggin titled The American Cool and the Dirty South, also in the library. And then next Thursday, at the 31st, Frida Escobedo will be delivering the open house lecture at Piper at 6:30, so please come. Today, we are very delighted to have Fredi Fischli and Niels Olsen to come and share their experience in curating and exhibiting architecture. They are the directors of exhibitions at the GTH, the Institute of History and Theory of Architecture at the ETH Zurich. They were appointed to this post about 5 years ago, and I believe one of the first shows you guys did was titled The Walk. And there was much talked about. Basically, I think the students of Philipp Ursprungs went to Naples and photo documented the whole walk through the city based on Lucius Burckhardt's notion of strollology. And the interesting thing was when these photographs came back to the ETH, Niels and Fredi basically installed these pieces in the basement, this massive maze of basement under the existing building. So the places that were chosen to exhibit these photographs actually has a dialogue with these aspects of the streets of Naples. So suddenly, it's not just a white box that contains these photographs, but you have to walk through this labyrinth and discover these pieces. And together with that, they've curated many other shows, which I hope we will see today. Numerous international exhibitions on art and architecture, including Readymades Belong to Everyone, also the title of today's talk that was shown in the Swiss Institute in New York a year ago, where they posed the question, is the ready-made an enemy or an opportunity for architecture? I saw the show myself. It was packed with contemporary ready-mades, from Christo's storefront piece to the air rights piece by Arno Brandlhuber on the roof of the Swiss Institute. It was completely densely packed, and it's kind of, in an interesting way, simulate the contemporary city. You know, I love that show. The only criticism I have is that we are not in that show. You know? But they've created many other things, like the Trix and Robert Haussmann show. It was the great designers that we know of, or the Inside Outside, the Petra Blaisse show that would travel from Zurich to Milan and would travel to Rome. Besides the ETH, they also create exhibitions at the schwarzescafé in Zurich, designed by Heimo Zobernig for the Luma Foundation. The recent publications include Ser Serpas, a book on Arno Brandlhuber, Dan Graham, and one on Richard Hamilton and Siegfried Giedion, strange bedfellows. Neither of them are architects, but they're both grandsons of legendary architects. Fredi being the grandson of Hans Fischli, one of the first Swiss architects who studied at the Bauhaus together with Max Bill, and Niels is the grandson of Ernst Giesel, the great architect in Zurich. Recently, I had a talk with Fredi's father, Peter Fischli of Fischli Weiss, and asking him about Hans Fischli, about his father, who is the architect. And he said, well, my grandfather is actually a surveyor, my father is an architect, I'm an artist, and my son is a curator. So he said, every generation, it gets less and less precise. You know? But I think only for the Swiss, this is a compliment. So on that note, please join me to welcome Fredi and Niels.
Thank you so much for having us, and it was a fantastic introduction because we will actually start with the grandmother. We will start our talk with the grandmother of Niels, because this is the place where we started to do exhibitions together. So we will give you a little bit a survey of the things we did, and we titled it Readymades Belongs to Everyone, because one thing we're really interested in is the context, and when you move all these objects of exhibitions, how they change, where you present them. So this, our initial place where we started to do exhibitions, was when we were studying art history, and there was the studio house. She was an artist, but she was older, so she wasn't physically working there anymore, and we would meet there to write our papers, to discuss, and then we figured, well, maybe we could do exhibitions there, but it wouldn't belong to us. It's still her studio house, so everything she did also had to stay there, and it had to go together.
I think, yeah, in the Mark's introduction, it really makes sense
the quote that curating is not really a precise discipline. And I think it's not true for all cases. If we would work at a museum where we have to work for a collection, for example, it's really kind of a precise task. But in our more vague discipline, it's really a kind of a self-claimed but also self-defined profession. So I think that's why we want to show you this kind of early student project, Studiolo, because it really shows this self-proclamation as a curator. And I think that's really the beauty of the art world, I think, that you can really self-proclaim something. I guess that's more difficult for architecture because it's a more complex to build up a business. But basically, really young as students, we were able to occupy the space of my grandmother and start to program exhibitions that were really taken seriously immediately. And I think this was the special case of this place, because I think in today's art world you can really do small exhibitions at small venues which are really at the periphery, but they can have a big impact, they can have a global reach somehow. And I think this intimacy was really important at that point. And Studiolo was slightly out of the Zurich city center, slightly suburban. So when people came, it was really an intimate one-to-one experience where they couldn't go around us. They had to talk to us, the curators, and we would guide them through the shows.
Because today you have so many exhibitions one should see. So we thought the only solution is that you're totally specific, and by this you have to be embarrassingly open about who you are and what you do. So we started with this house, and we started to do a first art exhibition with an artist called Jerry Bibi that worked on the house, and he was interested in the Prothese, it's called in German, where he would replace part of the house, and he would replace this railing and do a poem about it on modernist houses like this that were on sale, that he would read in the space. So already from the beginning, the house itself was part of the exhibition making there.
And so I think through this house, because it was a kind of an exhibit object itself, we got drawn into exhibiting also architecture. And since we both have grandparents that are architects of a specific time, we kind of felt we have to learn about this generation, but also we had the urge to also contradict this specific history. So then we found out at that time, about a couple of architects which are in the mid-80s called Trix and Robert Haussmann, and we learned that they are two really active designers still, but we also figured that they are not so known in Zurich, even though they built many projects that you would see in daily life, like the main station Zurich, or they would have completed several successful furniture designs of couches that people would have, that you know, but they were not really recognized. And also they were a bit kind of a nightmare of a generation older than us, because they were the so-called only postmodern designers in the Zurich context. So then we immediately thought we have to exhibit Trix and Robert Haussmann to bring them as kind of a contradicting figure.
But then when we started to do exhibitions, we also always thought it's not about like us telling, kind of teaching anything, because we were students and we were like trying to learn. So it was kind of our process of learning, is our process of exhibition making was the idea. So we did not just want to represent the oeuvre, but kind of always question it or open it up to new activities. So with the Haussmanns, what struck us was this one work that they did in 1980 when they were at the hospital. Robert Haussmann had an accident and he couldn't physically work anymore. So he did this device for design, because at the time he was criticizing this very dogmatic Swiss architecture of the Swiss box that had run out of ideas, as he called it. And what he did was a very kind of bureaucratic slide rule of words, that he would just collect all the words of the architecture discourse surrounding him, and they would write them down on these slides, and you would move them. So always you would get new combinations. You would have on one side like Bauhaus, or then you would have banal. And then what does it mean, banal, Bauhaus? It's like all these words that moves. And we use this as a device to then also give to artists and to test out if their thinking is still relevant.
And I think with this really early show, we kind of learned the meaning of curating, that basically it's about defining a reading of a work. Because with Haussmann's, you could do, in a way, a really fancy design show. Or on the one hand, you could show like the furniture objects, and because they were really involved with Alchemia, the early group before Memphis. But then we realized it's important to give an unexpected reading, in that case, with this slide rule, to show the relation to Oulipo, to concrete poetry, and show the conceptual nature, and to create links and networks in different generations with a younger generation of artists. So this, I think, we kind of learned with this model.
And also how to look at architecture through different perspectives, through the perspectives of artists working on it. Like here, for example, we did a show by early Japanese pop art pioneer Keiichi Tanami that did these fantastic sculptures out of like crafted wood, as you would do for Japanese wooden toys, and they were intended, as sculptures, but they were also kind of fantastic architecture in a way comparable to Paul Scheerbart that we would then present along with Keiichi Tanami.
So I think this was really key for us, that we, in a way, like learning was our trigger. So with Haussmann's, we learned about Alchemia, Memphis, about postmodernity in general. And with this fascination or this kind of fan approach, we went to Japan and we realized, there's Keiichi Tanami, and actually did something really similar to what happened in Europe at the time. And then from there we thought about, fantastische Architektur, Bruno Taut. So we did parallel to this Tanami show, we did a small show with etchings of Paul Scheerbart. So we thought we could give a new reading. So this was kind of our logic at the time, how to follow your really highly subjective narrative, but then kind of mediate it to an audience.
But then also coming back to this very local place that we figured out that the famous German painter Albert Oehlen is actually living in Switzerland and not too far away from us in the Appenzell and in the hilly mountains. But people were not aware. He was not like part of the local scene. And so we visited him and talked to him about the possibility of a show, and he said to us, well, I would have also, maybe with the interest of architecture that we have, I have these like very special new works that I did, that is these collages that kind of take the silhouettes of historical interior paintings and trace them, but replace them with this huge billboard advertisement. So in comparison to the avant-garde collage that is always kind of these like tiny parts that you put together, he really like transferred it to this everyday shouting of images, but then to this interior. So you see, for example, maybe I can show you this. Here, that's a bucket that someone is holding, and there's this woman standing there tracing this silhouette.
Yeah, basically a silhouette of a Dali painting. And so then we kind of learned from the Haussmanns that if you do a monographic exhibition with a known artist, you have to do something specific and really look at one aspect, which was the collage. So we had these enormous collages by Oehlen, but then they were also contrasted with an artist from Chicago with really tiny collages made with a small pincer, like with like millimeter-sized bits of papers. And out of this question of the interior painting, the domestic painting, which is of course an important motif in art history, we went further and we did a group exhibition with parts of the collection of Albert Oehlen, and not only his personal collection, but also his sources. So we kind of, by revealing his sources to, for example, obviously Kippenberger, but to Archwager, to these figures, to kind of give a framework in where to place the practice of his work. So I think that's a kind of another model for us that we learned at that time.
And then the exhibition was a house. So from outside you would have the house, a painting by Andreas Schulze on the left. Then here down to the right you would have the bathroom with the Mike Kelly rock or the Archwager mirror that is in there. And this we then also transformed into a book where you would have all these references that he and his friend painter Martin Kippenberger used. And we put them into a book where you would walk through and then discover the exhibition in that house again.
I think your books became really important because in a way the social aspect of curating is really important because meeting Albert Oehlen is a great inspiration, and then from him you come to new ideas and you learn. And so I think we always try to work in many chapters. And for instance, with Oehlen, it's still kind of ongoing. One thing leads to the other. And I think therefore we also like books because they always give a new horizon and, of course, a new chapter always.
So up to that point, it could also be very personal. It was this studio house that we could use. There was like good structures that we could get funding or we won a stipend. So it was all the things we wanted to do. But then things changed in a way when we in 2014 moved to here. So that's the campus of the ETH in Zurich. And suddenly it wasn't this like intimate studio house where you would walk in and right away meet us anymore. It was totally the contrary of this big science campus. So we also asked ourselves, well, how can we transfer this model to a place like this? And what we did was what Mark already explained in the introduction. We kind of ourselves first had to get to know the campus, and the first exhibition was this walk that also in a way worked to get to know us, because it was always personal tours. You would, like now during lunchtime when everybody quickly has time, you can get together and come with us onto this tour, and we would walk through the underground of the whole school to look at this exhibition on Naples that you already explained.
And I think this idea of the intimate, kind of to insist on the intimate encounter is something really important for exhibition making, because even though museums get enlarged, expanded all the time, at the end of the day, an exhibition is something really done with simple means, and it's really about a one-to-one experience. And this is, in a way, what we try to achieve with this early or first exhibition at ETH, because ETH is similar to the GSD, where you have so much program going on, so you need a lot of mechanism to draw the attention of the students and your colleagues. And this really, I think, happened with this kind of bizarre first show where one had to hike in the underground of the campus.
And then we were lucky that at the same time, Lucius Burkhardt, together with Cedric Price, was also the subject of the Swiss Pavilion in Venice, curated by Hans-Ulrich Obrist. And we collaborated then together, coming out of this walk exhibition for the Swiss Pavilion, that at the school we would do lectures on Lucius Burkhardt. The exhibition design was done by Herzog Dömeron, and the idea was that the pavilion would also, like the walk exhibition, would be more or less empty, but when you walk in there, you would meet a student from the ETH, and the student would show you the archive and would bring out the boxes and discuss together with you. So we could kind of do this this exhibition making from the beginning, kind of stretch it out and bring it to the students that they became a part of it, then living in Venice for the summer. But then also within the school, we thought, well, now we did this walk, now we cannot just go back to the gallery and do regular gallery shows, but maybe use this experience of walking around the campus and do the exhibition outside. So here the semester would start, and not as usual in the first week there would be the exhibition opening, but it would just be like a construction site in all the hallways. And then Tom Emerson was just newly appointed as professor, and we worked together with his students to build all these exhibition structures.
Because Tom Emerson's studio always did in the first 2 weeks a collaborative project where students would really kind of get to know each other by building together. And they built these pavilions. So we asked him, couldn't you build pavilions for us in the school? And you have to see the building we work in. At ETH, it's a 70s building. It's not really special architecture, I would say. It's quite generic, but what is really great with this place is that there are many big, generous hallways, kind of public spaces in this huge building. So we thought, we should really use these great hallways and occupy them for exhibition making. So this is what we did. So we had several stages all around the school, like this one, for example, or this amphitheater, or in the actual exhibition space, we had a working desk where a PhD student, Damian Kokalevsky, who was researching on the resurrection of Skopje, of these projects. That's this big model you see is a model by Kenzo Tange that he saved from an archive in Skopje. So he would actually work in the exhibition space on his PhD, organize roundtables, but also do an exhibition or lay out his like an accrochage of his archival material that he's at this moment kind of working on. So I think this was also another start. And I think we were really able to draw attention by the noise of building in the beginning, by this intimate kind of disturbing moment where people, suddenly it would be really loud in the hallways because metal is, making all these sounds. So I think, we had to find these tools to kind of be present in the school.
And also it's a device that you can do exhibitions that then can be smaller, because otherwise you're always confronted with this one big room and you have to fill it again and you have to fill it again. So first you just you build these structures and then you put on top whatever makes sense. Like here in the hallways it was an exhibition on architecture magazines or him working there. But then we also thought it's nice to be up there on the campus, but it could be good to have a connection to the city, to kind of make the campus kind of a special experience. When you go there, the campus is always part of the exhibition that you visit, but also to have an arm down to the city. So we started to do exhibitions here. That's a building by Shigon Goyer that houses the Kunsthalle Zurich and several art museums and art galleries. And within that building there is the Luma Foundation, where we could have a space to do exhibitions connected with the ETH. So what we did, we brought down kind of what we had by Tom Emerson, this arena, and kind of could already occupy the place by doing so.
And I think, like still at this point, or also still now, we are kind of, we have this kind of a double life in a way, or these two worlds that we work in, which is art and architecture. And I think to a certain degree, these two disciplines blend into each other. But what we realized is it doesn't really not as much actually. I mean, there are links, but we realize still it's hard to really connect both worlds. And also at ETH, the cultural audience in Zurich, they wouldn't really go to the campus and vice versa. Or like the professors would fly in for teaching, but they wouldn't necessarily go to the city to go to a lecture or to an opening and meet. So this is what we had our goal, like to really connect these two worlds and also these two different discourses to bring them together. And this was this first show then at Luma Foundation. So we try to show these connections which are already there. Like, for example, the landscape architect and Professor Günther Vogt, he's really close to Dan Graham. He would actually do for almost all of his pavilions, he would do the landscape situation. And so we did this project with Günther Vogt, which you see to the left. It's this wooden crate, which was called Wanderkammer, like a wordplay for Wunderkammer, Chamber of Curiosity. So, and he made it as a crate. So, and in this small a pavilion, he would show different tools of his design process. And it was made, like you see these lines on the floor, it was made for the exact same size of Dan Graham's studio exhibition space in the Lower East Side in New York. So it was made that you could fold it, ship it to New York, and then exhibit again at 3A Gallery, it's called, in Dan Graham's studio. So we produced this kind of wandering object.
But then it's not usual that an architect builds something like this, because of course architects build buildings and artists, they make artworks often that you can present in an exhibition space. So to exhibit architecture, sometimes you have to be inventive. And when we were looking for these references, for example, this work by Christian Keretz was just when we were visiting him to discuss with him as a professor at the school. He explained to us that every evening, to calm down from the office and from teaching, he's watching a DVD. And he has to show us his collection. So we went down to the basement, and it's this very well organized collection of movies where like one is behind the other, and he would also take out the DVDs and put them in a plastic sleeve so they take up less space. So you can see it's really an architect organizing this, and just looking at the object, it gives you an idea of his thinking maybe, because you also see the references of his films, for example.
And another project you see here, this gymnastics wall. I don't know how you call it in English, this object to make kind of fitness object. It's a work by Claude Baron. So we visited Claude Baron. We said, we want a project from you in this exhibition. And at the beginning, it was quite hard to get something else than what he would always show. Like he has these exhibition plates, as I think many architects, especially of his generation, have. But then we found this small booklet he did a long time ago with his daughter, who is a ballet dancer. And it's a ballet on the oblique, on his theory of the oblique. So then with him, we started to discuss if we couldn't reenact this gymnastics oblique work. And I think that's something which is really important with architecture exhibitions, because it's different to art. You, in a way, have to find strategies to also trick the architect to a certain degree to show something which isn't part of the office identity, or which isn't PR. I mean, that's a bit an extreme statement, but to do something which is unexpected for the office somehow. And I think that's really important.
Or then here with Peter Merkley, he did like these funny little objects that he would just out of cardboard, he would build for himself to use it as like small cabinets next to the bed or in the office. And the theme of the exhibition was coming from this artist, William Levitt, and was called Theater Objects. So we thought they kind of embody this theatricality that he always sets up in his studio or around him. And then we also brought the artist, where we took the title from William Levitt, to the main building of the ETH to make this theatrical circle of different columns, kind of mimicking these columns of the Semper building in this theatrical way.
I think probably Mark knows William Levitt. He's an artist kind of in the scene of probably John Baldessari of this generation. And we just thought it's great to bring him to the school as a kind of visiting artist, because he works with these stage set model-like sculptures. And we thought that's really an inspiring dialogue. And this is another project which was really special for us, also personally. It was with the office of Yonder Beltre and Inge Wink and Jo Tailleux, Beltre Wink Tailleux. And we were great fans of their work, that did this kind of bricolage work they did in Belgium. So we invited him to come to ETH, and we asked him to do an exhibition in our gallery. So he came and with Jo and Inge, and they looked at the gallery and they really didn't like it. And they said, actually we want to renovate and make your gallery better. And they went back to the cafeteria and made a drawing, and immediately on site made a project how to improve our gallery space. And we actually were excited, because we also thought it's a tricky space to do exhibitions. And we said, okay, let's do it. You have a commission, let's renovate it. But then really quickly we realized that the bureaucratics within ETH, the building department, it just doesn't work. And actually nothing would work. And so this is what then happened. You see here, so basically, so we went back to Yonder Beltre and said, we are so sorry, we can't do it. And he said, actually, it's no problem. I have a solution, let's just imitate our proposal. And this is what they did, a kind of a one-to-one model or imitation of their proposal, how to renovate the gallery.
So what they did, they built this wall in the space that before our space, it's quite a vitrine. It's like open to all the sides, which is nice because you see it when you daily move through the campus, you see the exhibitions, but it's hard because you need to always kind of build something in it. So they would kind of imitate the facade wall, how it moves, as an extra wall, and by this we would get a new, small, like really tiny exhibition space running through our space.
And like one other really funny example is you see the green column, because we have two white cladded columns in the gallery that are not so nice. And he thought, let's just take away the covering so you see the age profile. But this wasn't allowed because of fire protection reasons. So then he said, no problem, we just paint it as like we do an imitation, a representation of the age profile. And he said, but it has to be in pencil, in colored pencil drawing. But then we said, but how can we do it? It takes so much time to do these columns. And he said, no problem, I will just ask the professors.
They cannot refuse.
So the entire faculty, all the professors had to do the hand drawing of the columns. So we had different columns in the end, like also a brown one by Christian Carret, so like from different figures.
So then when we did all this effort to change the exhibition space, we of course after the exhibition did not remove it, but we just left it. So the new exhibitions went on like here on the architecture book that just went on top of our newly furbished exhibition space. And then also when we do exhibitions, we never try to show an architect's practice one-to-one, but maybe more something like an interest that someone has into something. So here that's the work of Sauter von Moos on the wall that are interested in the Venturis and their exhibition design and how they could like turn the exhibition space almost into a book by its graphics.
In the middle you see OMA's book machine, which I think it's like almost 1,000 books bound together. And so we did several exhibitions in this setting, so we kind of layered exhibitions here. Our second visiting artist, Dan Graham, in Yonder Beltre space, or with the carpet we could use to sit on the floor to watch a film, and we produced a new film on legislating architecture by Arno Brandlhuber, who is also now joined the faculty a few years later, and we did a show again in this same setting, but then without the carpet, but still with the wall, which was now cladded in a mirror foil with the office Kersten Geers, David van Zeven, that you all know. We did a show on their collage. And at that point, we also used again this newly invented drawing cabinet, this second gallery we had thanks to Jan and his studio. You see here.
So they could then also transform it. So office like cut this opening to the exhibition space that you saw, but also a hole that you can look through and see the John Haddock exhibition mirroring the office exhibition. Or then we just kept the wall, and we also had the Shinohara exhibition that you had here with his original drawings. But then to do this, the circle had to be closed again to have a clear white wall, and we inserted this cocoa mat for him.
So we thought we'd now just showed you kind of this consequence of different things blending into each other, which we think was really interesting, and also to create almost a kind of collection for the gallery.
So now we come back to this place in the city where we showed the DVDs by Christian Carrett. And also there we thought maybe we need to use this model of building actually in the exhibition space to get a new specific place. And so this house with the Kunsthalle Zurich, it's full of galleries and it's all these white cubes, one after the other. So what we did to kind of differentiate our space, we worked together with the Austrian artist Heimo Zobernig, and he turned the white cube into the idea of a black box. So a quasi cinema space, but that is called schwarzescafé, the black coffee that has like a tradition as the anarchist coffee, but also, of course, the coffee house that you have in Austria, and kind of in a way also destroy the exhibition space because you don't have these white walls anymore, but now you have this new setting of coffee tables, a big screen. There's also the library in this room, and we knew we could not run it as a real restaurant, but we just put there like a American coffee machine, and someone would do one in the morning, and you can get coffee for free, and also go there like to meet or to work, however you like.
We think Zobernig is really an interesting artist for in relation to architecture. He really works at the intersection, I think, of both disciplines, and he's really an important case for, I think, an important example for displays, which is a theme we're really interested in. He often does museum displays to show art. One example here that we publish in our book is, for instance, he did several exhibitions with red light, and if you have red light, all the colors leave paintings and they become gray, for example. And I think, but then also at the opening of the schwarzescafé, we invited Mark Wigley, who did a lecture on this work, because of course he did this book on white walls and designer dresses, and he talked about kind of this transgression from white cube to black cube and how it refers to modernity in a broader sense. And I think probably you've seen Heimo Zobernig's show at MIT List, I think, last year. And I think he's just we just showed this from Tate Liverpool, an example how he rehung the collection there.
So then you have this new setting in the space that is in a way impossible to do exhibitions, but in a way also makes it easier because you don't have to do the whole space anymore. So we did this exhibition on the home, where we would just then hang on the library shelves, like use all the inventory that is there within the space. And by doing so, we could also always change the space. Here we did a show with precious Okoyomon, where we just removed everything that was inside and built in these trees, kind of making this outside space. Or here with a young artist from Zurich, Sitara, this public sculpture that then wandered to the outside. Or Sarah Morris, Women's History Museum, or that's the show we just now did with Reba Maybury.
So we really use the schwarzescafé as kind of a parallel platform where we can, in a really fast pace, show young artists from around the world to do site-specific commissions, like a kind of a project space within this quite large Luma Foundation, to have really a fast pace of programming. And here we show you our third visiting artist, Christopher Williams, a conceptual photographer who is partly based in Chicago. And this was his exhibition. As you see, there were no photographs at all. And basically, what he did, he brought his personal collection of museum walls, because since a long time he has an obsession with display and museum walls. And he has one, this one, like a really famous one of the Art Institute in Chicago of star architects, SOM. But then he also has this vernacular one. This one from the Bonner Kunstverein, which is a museum wall that a carpenter just built in the storage with found material.
But then it has had this Daniel Buren exhibition there, where the artist would make these huge stripes, and then when you take out the wall, you take with you the stripe, and he wanted to move them to our exhibition space, but then they were too high, so they had to be cut apart from each other and presented next to each other. So they even more, in a way, became these sculptures out of these display walls.
And I think this we thought was really a successful show for the architecture school, because it's really about architecture, it's about the wall, and it was just coinciding with the Venice Biennale of Reem Koolhaas, and Christopher Williams had a close relationship to Reem Koolhaas, and he also went with students to OMA at that time. So I think it was an interesting comment on this show on the architecture fundamentals. And just to show you briefly, there was a second chapter of this show. It was his first theater production of Williams, and which was not about acting, but it was about the craft of theater, and it was just about the stage set that you see here.
And so that's another exhibition we did with Smiljan Radic, and we don't really want to show one-to-one the professors that are already at the school, because they are so present. So we're often interested in the visiting professors, but not just in themselves, but in their interests. And we discovered that Smiljan Radic has this big collection of radical architecture and design, of ephemera, of posters, books. And for us, it was very revealing to learn about his practice from this side. And everything made a little bit more sense why he builds how he does when we discovered. And so we did this exhibition presenting not him, but his collection on these displays that we would hang from the ceiling, also made as an exhibition that then can travel and go on and go to Chile and be exhibited there. And also through doing this, we realized, what kind of display, like these hanging walls, we could use for the exhibition space, and we got interested in curtains.
So here, something again, you have this great curtain at the Gondhal of a Dutch designer, Petra Blaisse, and we had to, a few years ago, we organized an exhibition on Man Transforms. On the exhibition, Hans Hollein curated, and it was an archival show, but of course our space, or our gallery, is the worst for archival exhibitions because it has direct light, it has no sunshades. So we commissioned Petra Blaisse, because we were great fans of her, to do a permanent display setting, and she proposed a kind of a curtain enfilade that divides the space in different cabinets. And what she did were really rough curtains out of black PVC and out of white bedsheet-like cotton material, textiles. And by working with Petra Blaisse, we got really interested in her work that we start to learn about. She did the early exhibitions of OMA, for example, but worked with many international architects like Lacaton Vassal, Sana, but also OMA, on interiors and landscape architecture. And we thought her practice is really a profound kind of contribution to the discipline of design, because often we associate design with luxury. It's really luxury connotated. But Petra Blaisse works in these really large-scale, often corporate projects, but brings in something extremely rough, something really based on ready-mades in most cases, something without luxury materials, for instance, like black PVC or white bed sheets.
So also, to do an exhibition with someone, we tried to work over steps. So it was a way to kind of introduce Petra Blaisse and just not present her practice, but make her part of the exhibition space and be present there. And so we did another exhibition at the Luma Foundation, now down in the city, where we worked together on appropriation, and also now already we're getting closer to the ready-made. where she made this fantastic exhibition design of plastic, and the exhibition was called Theft is Vision. It was about stealing as a form of appropriation. So as if you would go to this kind of police storage room or something like this, you would have this plastic, that is this wrapping plastic you use for shipping or to wrap your food. So you could see the whole exhibition space in one, because we made these groupings of artworks, and through this open space they still came together.
We thought it's really a genius proposal from Petra Blaisse, because it was this vast white cube space, but we needed cabinets, but the space was a bit too small for all the different cabinets we wanted. So I think invisible walls was a genius proposition, to have them translucent. And from this, we just thought it's important that we go even further and organize a retrospective of her work and really go into the oeuvre. So at the historic main hall of ETH of Gottfried Semper, we organized a big exhibition where we looked at the archive and tried to show the scope of her practice. And at ETH you have this history of kind of representational monographic survey shows in this hall, but of course it's really problematic, because of course in the past they were very male dominated. So we thought it's so important to show Petra Blaisse and her studio in this specific space, and she proposed this negligee-like curtain.
Also the way of doing an exhibition, that there is kind of so much and very representative, but at the same time also almost nothing, because we were always a little bit afraid to deal with this exhibition space, because of these representative exhibitions were like, you would show all the power that you could build in this hall. But now with Petra, we just had an exhibition on curtains that we could easily hang like in 2 days, and then also take it away and send it off to traveling to the Triennale or now to Rome.
It almost had something obscene, because the textile was so thin, almost like a negligee that contrasted this heavy Gottfried Semper architecture, this stone place.
And this usage of material that she does, like when she wrapped the plastic, this kind of one-to-one, you take something as a ready-made, like with us kind of triggered the question what the role of the ready-made is in architecture. So this was the theme of the exhibition we did last year at the Swiss Institute, because in art and for the contemporary art production, it's such a fundamental technique of working. But does it actually exist, the ready-made, in architecture, or is it the contrary, because it still needs you as an architect actually building, and the ready-made could never replace you? Or does it exist, like in the case of La Carton Vassal, when they did this place in Bordeaux, where they kind of don't needed to add anything to that place, but just restore the lamps and kind of improve the cleaning of this place. So when they did the Palais de Tokyo, and not adding to the building, but taking away to the structure.
And I think in art, the ready-made as a concept really changed everything. To a certain degree, it perhaps was the beginning also of conceptual art. And what we realized, which is really contradicting for architecture, that actually the ready-made is, as Mark said in the beginning, maybe even the enemy, because with architecture, you want to build, you want to make, because that's part of the work. But then we also realize perhaps it's also the ultimate obsession of an architect, to have this kind of pure conceptual approach that doesn't involve any labor at all. But this we try to show. So we kind of created a gathering of different approaches. Like here, Smiljan Radic to the left side, you see these models Radic does, and they are kind of quasi surrealist sculpture-like objects, where he takes as found things and puts them together as assisted ready-mades that help him during a design process.
Or then here the work of Philippe Toma, where we also took the title of the exhibition, but also this talk today, because Readymades Belong to Everyone was an exhibition he did in '87 in the Cable Gallery in New York, where when you would visit the exhibition space, it wouldn't work as an exhibition anymore, but it became this kind of small office. You would have like a waiting area with like chairs, as you would see them here. You would have tables and wrapping materials and like posters announcing Readymades Belong to Everyone, kind of like a PR company. And the rule of the game was that when you would buy an artwork there, you would get the authorship of it. So to this, also he as an artist is kind of erased in the exhibition history, and we could never name him. But it was always the name of the collectors or the galleries or the people that got it at the moment. So for us, it's not that we kind of get to this point of Readymades Belong to Everyone, this kind of radical kind of deletion of authorship, but it is in a way a reminder that so many things, they are just what they are at the place where they are, and how we can shift them in exhibition making.
But it was really a dense show. We just have a few examples. This is by Laurel Deaton, a sculptor but trained architect, kind of a rebel of the urban realm that goes out and takes things and transforms them as sculptures, here as a kind of bar.
So the Swiss Institute was transformed, and these were the actual walls that were outside protecting the renovation that we then just brought inside to build the display for the exhibition space. Or here, this work is by Claire Fontaine, and it's kind of the ready-made of these city performer figures that are super uncanny because you don't know who is behind them. It's this super brutal work that you do possibly as an immigrant if you don't have like papers and you are totally anonymous under there. It's also a work you can do if you cannot speak the language, where kind of the human inside almost disappears. And they kind of brutally appropriated this work and did sculptures out of them. So these figures, these street performers, then became the inhabitants of the exhibition.
This was a really beautiful work by Cecilia Puga, two clay models of found projects, vernacular projects that she also used for her design process, or a flag, an as-found claimed flag by a Mexican artist, Audriana Lager. Or here to the left, a famous work by really early, almost student project by Reem Koolhaas, his study on the Berlin Wall, which is really kind of, for him, that he appropriated as a ready-made and showed the power of this ready-made. So yeah, just to give you a sense of this really wild gathering of different approaches. And here we come back kind of to the beginning of our talk, to Trix and Robert Haussmann, which was in I think in 2011, one of our first exhibitions, but we worked on it again because in the meantime the archive of these architects came to ETH. So out of this reason we organized a traveling retrospective which went to different venues. Here to Nottingham Contemporary, a building designed by Caruso St. John, who is also a professor. Adam Caruso is also a professor at ETH.
And then also with the ready-made in mind, we kind of discovered that the very first works that we presented by them also already in our exhibition space were ready-made. You see these chairs in the back, and they were part of an exhibition called Chair Fun, happening in '67 as an attack on functionalism. Because there was in Switzerland the jury called Die Gute Form by Max Bill, where every year at the furniture fair, they would announce what is the good form and what is not, what follows the rules of functionalism. So they kind of made fun about this by this Chair Fun exhibition, using ready-mades like these 3 chairs that are put together so you cannot sit on top of them anymore. You cannot really see it in the back, but there is like one that is just an Eames structure where their studio burned down and they just had the skeleton and they put these spikes on top so you cannot sit down anymore. Or then the ultimate kind of anti-chair chair made out of neons that you saw a little bit earlier that would collapse if you sit down on it.
And we also went back to the book again because there were two artistic interventions, one by Liam Gillick, because we asked him if he would contribute an essay, because he's also an author beside working as an artist. And then he provided a really unusual text from him, which was kind of a small novel-like story, really humorous, which was about a stool that wants to become a table. And it was basically about travesty in postmodernity. And the great thing was that when he wrote this almost Dadaistic story about different furnitures, going to the shrink, Robert Haussmann, on the other hand, did drawings to illustrate it like a cartoon. And I think these things are really great if you kind of, by combining different protagonists, if a new work is realized. So we brought it also back to the exhibition in Nottingham with these Adolf Loos-like posters that you saw before, these black and white ones. So as kind of text posters in the exhibition.
So in the story, this stool that feels like a table then also goes to the shrink, as you said, and then the shrink explains to him that, well, actually 80% of all furniture are multifunctional. And then out of this he comes back and it ends like in this sex scene between different furniture.
Finally, the exhibition came back to ETH, where we installed it really almost as a domestic living room. Again, with an exhibition design of Caruso Senchon. And I think this is always important. We never have a proper exhibition designer. We always use the exhibition design as a piece of work, as a comment to the exhibit on the objects that we exhibit at that point. And with Adam Caruso, there are a lot of links to the work of Haussmann, his interest in the ornament, for example. So I think these connections are really important for us.
And here it was the actual carpet that the Haussmanns have in their home, because he kind of observed how like domestic their work is, and it is actual these furniture pieces, and maybe it's wrong to put them on big pedestals, but the whole exhibition space can become a pedestal by using the ready-made of the carpet in the exhibition space.
And since we always follow these narratives, immediately after the Haussmann exhibition, we did a show that kind of follows up on this Alchemia context. And we came across one participant of Alchemia, which is Cinzia Ruggeri, who was a figure that wasn't per se just an architect, but she was also a fashion designer and a furniture maker, kind of almost a hybrid practice. And she was in the core of Alchemia. And so we asked her if we could do kind of a monographic show on her work with interventions of people that were around her at that time. And she proposed a show which was called Home, a user's manual, and it was kind of a reenactment of the famous Museum of Modern Art's New Domestic Landscape exhibition.
So it's often also not just the architect that we exhibit, but as we said, the references or friends or the pool surrounding the person. So here Alexander Brodsky was a visiting professor, and his exhibition was not about him, but an ode to his favorite artist and architect. So his favorite artist is the painter Oleg Kudryashov, and then his favorite architect was Peter Merkley, that just ended his teaching at the school. So he built these cabinets where you, for Peter Merkley, you would slip onto and you would be kind of in this universe of his drawings, but not just of the drawings of Peter Merkley, but also there was a small bar with a whiskey bottle that you could serve yourself, or a corner with an ashtray where you could actually smoke, as Peter does in his studio, in this fumoir within the exhibition space.
So we come soon to a conclusion of our presentation, but we couldn't decide on the editing of which show to include and which not. So we included another one because we thought it's just important to show that we really often work with the archive at ETH, because we have a great archive mainly on Swiss architects, but also we have the archive of Siegfried Giedion and of Sian. And then we often, like in between, do smaller exhibitions where we deal with the archive. And one which was like really kind of a lucky find, because we realized that the first exhibited work of the British pop artist Richard Hamilton was a series of etchings titled Reapers. And these Reaper etchings that you see on this blue easel were made in direct reference to the Giedion's book, The Mechanization Takes Command, which was published, I think, 48. And the etchings of Hamilton, his first exhibition was in the beginning, I think in spring, probably, maybe I'm mistaken, but like a few months after in 49. And it was a direct comment to the Giedion's book, because Hamilton was part of the independent group and they really discussed these new publications at the time. So I think these things we really like to follow, these unexpected constellations. And out of it, again, we did a book with a reader to address this connection of both Giedion and Hamilton.
Now this is our last slide. This is our current exhibition that we have in the school. It's by a young artist from London called Gilly Tal. And we were also interested kind of how far can we reach out, how much like someone needs to be already inscribed in architecture and its discourse, or if it's really possible to bring in someone from like our idea to kind of claim her as an artist for architecture. So she goes around in London and takes this picture like these kind of generic fruit and vegetable stands that you have outside of a cafe, or here I think it's a crepe place, that kind of tries to transform this totally generic kind of chain to this inviting, like personalized space. And she does these pictures always at an angle, so they even kind of mimic or imitate these pictures as you would see it in a Time Out magazine or like in an in-flight magazine. So it's really an art and a photography practice, but when we presented them, also now not in the exhibition space, but on huge billboards spread throughout the school, so you see it on your everyday commute, I think the architects and the students at the school kind of got an idea of the image that this artist has on contemporary architecture.
But I think at the beginning, when we started as curators at ETH, we had to like really precisely kind of test out how far can we go. And I think now after several years, we were really able to do an extremely critical show towards architecture, almost an anti-architecture exhibition on real estate development around London, for example, and also about the kind of also the evil tricks of representation around architecture. And I think this was it's a pity we don't have the images yet. Maybe we can show them later on because the installation photographer just came by. And I guess at this point we're really happy to conclude and maybe open to the audience. If you have any specific questions, we can also go back in the slideshow.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. I would just like to hear a little bit more about your practice as curators together. If you've ever worked independently from each other, or you can ever imagine that, what does it mean, sort of what is gained by always working together collaboratively as curators?
I mean, we worked together individually. We already did shows before, but then we also realized that it is a practice that is all around discussions. And it's not just kind of this one idea that I know something and I try to teach you by representing my knowledge, but then it's also not just the discussion between us, but more a group, that it's the discussion with the person that we work together, but then even further we want to have with this person a discussion about something else that the person is interested in. And I guess it's not natural that it's possible to work like this. Not all the formats are made that it allows two people to come here to talk together, to do the exhibitions together. But I guess if it is possible, it can really, like as a ping pong, the way we talk, it can really, as a feedback, kind of create more energy for this exhibition making. And I guess that's also why we both realized it also made sense, not just for our personal experience, because it's more fun to work together, but also for the making of exhibitions themselves.
And I think that, as you hopefully realize, that we're not like artist curators. We don't have these one ideas, like one crazy idea that we try to illustrate in a composition of an exhibition, but we are really driven by what the artwork or the architect's work or the artist's work is about. And if we do group shows, we always try to kind of overcome this situation where we just have a concept and then we take works that should illustrate our argument. And therefore, I think this early show, we showed you of this logarithmic slide rule in Italy with younger artists. We thought, how could we escape this problem of being a guest curator? So we thought, it's great, we give an artwork, this logarithmic slide rule of Trix and Robert Haussmann, and then new works will be produced in reaction to this initial we give them as a homage, as a comment. And that's something I think really helps if you're two, because you don't get into this situation where you're also trapped in this authorship idea somehow.
Mm-hmm. And the exhibition making is about that you share something that you found. And it's this moment, like when we started to do exhibit, like, did you listen to this song? Have you seen this film? And if you kind of keep up this moment, it's kind of best for this practice, I think.
Hi, thanks again for being here. My question is about the exhibition space as a space of critique. And you talked about how when you first started, or maybe you said that by the time you got to this show, you felt like you were able to offer a more direct critique of architecture. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about maybe that concern in the beginning. You know, was it a fear that kept you from doing something more critical early on because you were new to the place and you weren't sure what the audience's appetite for that might have been, or what the professor's appetite might have been? And now, having had the experience of doing this show, based on its reception, maybe how are you thinking about the role of critique in exhibitions going forward?
I think, like since the beginning, we always aim to do really critical exhibitions. But I think what changed over the years, and I guess that's a general cultural shift taking place, that it's always with exhibitions, it's a matter of mediation or access. Like, how can you trigger people, an audience, to open themselves to look at it and get into it? And at the beginning, it was more difficult in some cases to place something and that it's actually being received. Like if we would show an artist that no one knows at ETH or in Zurich, like it would be just hard to get an audience. And you always had to combine it with something they know. If you show an artist lesser known, you would need to invite an architect who is known that gives an introduction. You had to do these links. And now, in the recent years, and it doesn't have to do something with us per se, but I think with a general shift, also a shift within the architecture school at ETH, that the faculty and the students are much more interested in things they don't know and in like things outside of the canon. And I think this is really fantastic, and I think this really changed.
Mm-hmm. And it meant, I mean, our practice is, of course, it's a joyful practice. It's this practice of sharing ideas, what you see. But then I also would still a little bit claim that critique is the motor of it. Because as an architect, you look at a project and you try to identify the problems and respond to them. And also when you do exhibitions, it's just by yourself, you have to figure it out what are the problems that you're replying to. So when we started to work at the school, there were like really this kind of heavy monographic representative representative exhibitions that were happening there, kind of reassuring the school and the professors how great they were. So just by the making of the exhibitions in a different way, it was already a critique in the way of exhibition makings. But also then the subjects like Haussmanns, they were like totally neglected, like now by the younger architects generation that was above of us, that kind of overcame postmodernism and did not want to be affiliated with something like the Haussmanns anymore. So it is always kind of looking for a place where you can respond to a problem as a critique also, yes.
Thank you. Just to mention another unexpected coordination, because Maya Hoffman, she's coming to our Option Studio midterm review on Thursday. And our studio is called Fellowscape, and it's from the landscape department. And I think the spirit of our studio is kind of the ready-made spirit, because Fellowscape is some kind of the ready deployed, and you somehow, instead of making a totally new project, you're trying to discover or to reinterpret the land. And my own question would be, because ready-made, you use the word like making fun or like humor. I think it's part of the spirit, especially in an artistic concept. But what Duchamp do for himself to to avoid an endless diluting, just like an endless joke. Because if ready-made is a joke, if you don't stop it, it becomes boring. So how he controlled is to control the quantity of ready-made pieces every year. He just said, I just cannot do too many. So I think it's also a concern for us when we're doing the design, because if you try to enact every piece of land, and it becomes a problem for a design disciplinary. And I'd just like to know your thinkings on this, or do you have this kind of confusion during your contact of the ready-made concept? Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's really always a confusion also for me also when I think of the ready-made, like something is contradicting that. I think the ready-made is really different to, for instance, a prefab modular, like a modular system. I think it's the exact opposite, it's the ready-made. It's basically you claim something industrial, like an urinal that you can reproduce, but actually it's about this moment of claiming its unique presence. And this claiming of its unique presence is something quite weird, quite bizarre, something strange. It's like almost a surreal act, and I think that's really the interesting part, I would say. And I think, I'm really curious about your project for the landscape project for Arles, because I think one show I would just like to mention to you, because that we saw and really for us was really touching when we saw it several years ago. It was called To the Moon Via the Beach. And it was in the amphitheater in this Roman town in Arles. There's a big amphitheater for bullfights, for example. And they brought in a lot of sand into this amphitheater and brought beach artists that make, like sand castles. And then they invited a lot of artists to work in this setting over a period of time. And we at that time attended to see this exhibition, and I think it was really a great work.
Which was also in a way, I don't know if it was intended like this, but like an interpretation on the ready-made landscape that you already have there, because the place you are working on, now that there's no landscape architecture, is like it's full of these dusts and this kind of sand that is like with the wind coming through this big railway factory that was abandoned, and this by itself has kind of a really strong landscape architecture quality, I think, that then found an interpretation within this exhibition in the amphitheater, maybe. And I see that now it's the goal to kind of change this, to bring in green grass and make it this kind of livable place. But this dusty sand also had a great quality, the ready-made.
Well, first of all, thank you for the questions. I thought these are great questions. I don't mean to advertise for our next event, but the Dave Hickey, 25 years ago, he wrote about this piece called The American Cool, and he talked about the difference between cool and ironic as two modes of operation that achieve the same end. And basically, the end is that allows you to speak one's mind with a disclaimer. Whereas irony, he thinks is a European operation, allows you to delay the meaning of what you say. Coolness allow you to delay the urgency of that meaning. So I always you talk about Duchamp being he talked about Duchamp being an ironic monster, like the ready-made being his operation, And I thought that's an interesting moment just to think about the cultural weight of these modes that you've used. Also, Paige talked about the role of critique in an architecture exhibition, and I always feel it is something important. I think the thing is the critique, how is the critique packaged? Is it a avant-garde critique, in-your-face critiquing, or is it a Trojan horse? And I think the way you answer, somehow you ground it in something that people are familiar with so that the new could be brought in, or so that the critique could be brought in, is something kind of important, I feel. I think you've certainly came a long way since your grandmother's house. and I'm very curious how you maintain, as the scale of the shows becomes larger, as it becomes vaster, as it becomes more international, how do you maintain that type of intimacy, that type of directness, that type of almost like quirkiness that you have in these type of small shows that you have in the beginning?
I think you do it by an analysis of the specific place, because every place also has something embarrassing or something quirky, or has like a charmful side, has like something that you can go to and like grab it there. And I think that's even with like big representational exhibition spaces like this main hall of the ETH built by Gottfried Semper. As soon as you put this sculpture by William Levitt in this room, this like not so small, but in comparison, small sculptures already kind of critiques and kind of comments this big building that is around it. So if you find this kind of moments where you can twist the context, I think it should be anywhere possible.
And I think also as a curator, the profession is really something that functions with simple means. Yeah, maybe you go to a bigger institution or these things, but at the end of the day, it's always about an exhibition, which is about an intimate encounter, and there are not many possibilities you have. It's really kind of a simple thing you do, more or less. And I think it's really important that you always stick to this, the one-to-one experience of visitor versus the objects in the show. And I think that's extremely important, and also our own motivation is really subjective, really intimate. It's what we are kind of fans of, what we are fascinated by. And you just have to follow this stream, because there are no objective givens what our next show should be. It can only be a subjective fascination that tells you somehow.
Well, there's a myth that when Stanislavski came to the U.S., he met with like 5 or 6 people, and those 5 or 6 people, Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, Montgomery Clift, they became the father and grandfather and mothers of method acting. I feel maybe the 15 people here kind of benefited from that. So thank you again. Niels and Fredi, great.
Thank you.